I remember the day I first met her, the way her laughter filled the room, a sound that once felt like home. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the leaves outside danced in hues of red and gold. We had built a life together, filled with shared dreams and whispered secrets. My wife, Sarah, was everything I could have hoped for: intelligent, witty, and fiercely loyal. We would often spend our weekends exploring the city, discovering quaint little cafes and art galleries, our hands intertwined as we navigated the world together. Our home was a sanctuary, adorned with photographs of our travels and milestones. I can still picture the way her eyes sparkled when we celebrated our anniversary last year, her smile lighting up the dimly lit restaurant. We talked about the future, about children and a house in the suburbs, a life that felt so certain and promising. But then came the podcaster, a man whose voice seemed to weave a spell over my wife, drawing her into a world I could not penetrate. His name was Mark, and he was a rising star in the podcasting world, known for his charismatic storytelling and deep dives into human experiences. I had heard of him through Sarah, who would often listen to his episodes while cooking dinner or winding down after a long day. At first, I thought it was harmless, just another interest of hers. She would laugh at his jokes, share snippets of his episodes, and I could see how captivated she was. I even encouraged her passion, thinking it was great that she had found something that engaged her. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice the subtle changes in her behavior. The late nights spent with her headphones on, the way she would smile at her phone when she received a message, and the conversations that seemed to drift into a realm I didn't understand. It was in the quiet moments, the late-night episodes, that I began to sense a shift, a distance that grew like a chasm between us. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just a phase, a fleeting fascination. But there was an undercurrent of something darker, something that gnawed at me every time I caught her staring at her phone, her expression one of longing and intrigue. I had no reason to suspect anything sinister, yet my gut told me otherwise. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home, a spectator to a life that was slowly slipping away from me. The turning point came one fateful evening. I had returned home early from work, eager to surprise Sarah with her favorite takeout. As I stepped into our living room, I found her sitting on the couch, her laptop open and headphones on. She was laughing softly, a sound that used to fill me with warmth but now sent a chill down my spine. I stood there frozen, watching her as she typed furiously, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It was as if she was in a world where I didn't exist. I wanted to confront her then, to demand answers. But I hesitated, uncertain of what I would say or how I would react. Instead, I slipped away to the kitchen, my heart racing as I tried to calm my thoughts. I poured myself a glass of water, but it felt like I was drowning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the woman I loved was slipping through my fingers. Little did I know that the truth was lurking just beneath the surface, ready to shatter the fragile world we had built together. It was only a matter of time before the facade would crumble, and I would be forced to confront the reality of Sarah's infidelity. The podcaster had cast a spell over her, and I was about to discover just how deep the betrayal ran. The days that followed felt like a blur, a haze of anxiety and doubt. I watched Sarah with a renewed scrutiny, searching for clues, for anything that would confirm my growing fears. She was still the same woman I loved, yet there was an air of secrecy about her that I couldn't ignore. My mind raced with possibilities, each more painful than the last. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't relent. The turning point came one Thursday evening. I had finally decided to confront Sarah. I needed to know the truth, even if it shattered me. I waited until after dinner, when we were settled on the couch, the glow of the television casting shadows around us. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I turned to her, the words caught in my throat. "Sarah, can we talk?" I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "Sure, what's up?" she replied, her tone casual, but I noticed the way her eyes flickered to her phone. Instantly, my chest tightened. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my resolve. I've been feeling like there's something off between us lately. Are you hiding something from me?" Her expression changed, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before it settled into one of confusion. "What do you mean?" "Of course not. You know I'd tell you if something was wrong." I stared into her eyes, searching for any hint of the truth. I feel like you've been distant. You spend so much time listening to that podcaster, and I can't shake the feeling that he means more to you than just entertainment." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see her processing my words, but instead of reassurance, I was met with an uncomfortable tension. "You're being ridiculous," she said finally, but there was an edge to her voice that made my skin crawl. "Am I?" I pressed, my voice rising slightly. "I just want to know if there's something I should be worried about." That's when the dam broke. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to something more guarded, as if she had been caught off guard. "It's just a podcast, Alex, you're overreacting." But I wasn't satisfied. I needed more than vague assurances. "I need to know if you're being honest with me. Are you having an affair?" The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could see her face pale, the color draining from her cheeks as she registered the accusation. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The world around us faded, leaving only the weight of that question. "I can't believe you would even suggest that," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, that told me everything I feared was true. "Just tell me," I urged, desperation creeping into my voice. "Is it Mark, the podcaster?" Her silence was deafening, and in that moment I knew. The truth crashed over me like a tidal wave, pulling me under. I felt my heart drop, a visceral ache spreading through my chest as the reality of her betrayal sank in. I had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed was a different kind of agony. "It's complicated, Alex." She finally stammered, but I couldn't hear her words over the roar of my own thoughts. "Complicated?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You've been sleeping with him, haven't you?" Tears filled her eyes, and I could see the struggle within her as she fought to find the right words. "I never meant for it to happen, it just did." The confession felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the betrayal left me feeling hollow. I had trusted her with everything, and now it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to us?" "I don't know, Alex." He listened. "He understood me in a way you don't," she said, and each word felt like a stab to my heart. "You've been so busy with work, and I felt lonely." Loneliness. That word echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of the cracks in our marriage that I had been too blind to see. I had thought we were solid, but now it felt like we were standing on shifting sands. "I can't believe this," I whispered, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "You've betrayed me, Sarah. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." As I walked away from her that night, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal and heartbreak. The woman I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger who had chosen another man over our life together. I was left with a choice, to wallow in the pain or to take action. And in that moment, a dark determination began to take root within me. After that night, everything changed. The air in our home felt thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I spent the following days in a haze, my mind racing with images of Sarah and Mark together, laughing and sharing secrets that should have been ours. The betrayal cut deep, and I was left grappling with a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. But beneath it all, a darker resolve began to take shape. I couldn't just sit idly by and let this injustice slide. Mark had taken my wife from me, and I felt it was only right that he face the consequences of his actions. His podcast had built a persona around authenticity and connection, and yet here he was, destroying the lives of those around him without a second thought. I wanted to expose him, to reveal the truth to his audience and watch as the facade crumbled, just like my marriage. The first step in my plan was to gather evidence. I needed more than just Sarah's confession. I needed proof that would leave no room for doubt. I started by paying attention to her phone habits. I realized she kept her messages hidden, her phone always face down when she wasn't using it. But I was determined. I began to look for opportunities to sneak a glance whenever she left her phone unattended. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I justified it as a way to reclaim my dignity. One evening, as Sarah took a shower, I saw my chance. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I rushed over, glancing at the screen to see a message from Mark. My heart raced as I opened it and my stomach turned as I read their exchange. They were planning to meet again. The message was filled with flirtation and longing, a stark reminder of the bond they shared that I had been oblivious to. I quickly took screenshots of their conversation, my hands shaking as I did so. This was the evidence I needed. I felt a mix of triumph and despair, knowing that I was inching closer to exposing the truth while simultaneously feeling the weight of my own heartbreak. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to dig deeper. I began to listen to Mark's podcast, each episode filled with stories that seemed to resonate with his audience. He spoke about relationships, trust, and vulnerability, all the while carrying on an affair with a married woman. It was infuriating to hear him preach about honesty while living a lie. I took notes, identifying episodes where he discussed topics that could easily tie back to his betrayal. I was building my case, and with each episode, my resolve solidified. As I gathered more evidence, I started to think about how I would deliver the news to his audience. I envisioned a dramatic reveal, something that would shake the very foundation of his podcast and force him to confront the reality of his actions. I considered reaching out to his listeners directly, perhaps through social media, or even by setting up an anonymous account to share my side of the story. But I knew that I needed to be careful. I had to make sure my actions would have the maximum impact. I spent nights crafting messages, weaving together the evidence I had gathered into a coherent narrative. I envisioned a post that would detail the affair, complete with screenshots and timestamps, painting a picture of the betrayal that had unfolded right under my nose. I wanted his audience to understand the full extent of what had happened, to see the man behind the microphone for who he really was. But as I plotted my revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that crept in. Was I justified in what I was doing? Was it right to expose Sarah's infidelity publicly? She had betrayed me. But did that give me the right to destroy her in return? I wrestled with these questions, often finding myself staring at the wall, lost in thought. In the end, I decided that I wasn't just acting out of revenge. I was also seeking justice. Mark had built his career on honesty and connection, yet he had betrayed that very foundation. He needed to be held accountable, and I would be the one to do it. I began to feel a sense of purpose, a fire igniting within me that drowned out the guilt. I formulated a plan that would culminate in a live episode of his podcast. I learned that he frequently took calls from listeners during his recordings, allowing them to share their thoughts on the topics he discussed. I would call in anonymously, revealing the affair in real time, exposing him to his audience while letting them hear my pain. It was the perfect stage for my revenge, and I could hardly contain my anticipation. As the days passed, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I knew I was crossing a line, but the thought of Mark's downfall fueled my determination. I was ready to take action to expose the truth and reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. It was time to confront my wife's lover and bring his world crashing down. The day of the podcast recording arrived, and I felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. I had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, rehearsing the words I would say, envisioning the reactions of both Sarah and Mark as the truth unfolded before their audience. With every passing hour, my anxiety transformed into a steely resolve. I was determined to confront the man who had shattered my marriage and expose him for the fraud he truly was. I had learned from my research that Mark recorded his episodes every Thursday evening. I made sure to clear my schedule, positioning myself in a quiet room with a reliable phone connection. As the hour approached, I felt my heart race, pounding in my chest like a drum. I had set up an anonymous account under a pseudonym, one that would keep my identity hidden while allowing me to share my story. As I dialed into the podcast line, my mind raced with the potential outcomes. What if I hesitated? What if? I couldn't find the right words, but deep down I knew I had to do this. I had to find my voice even if it was wrapped in the cloak of anonymity. The line rang, and I could hear the familiar sound of Mark's voice as he introduced the episode. Welcome back to Life Unfiltered, where we dive into the real stories behind the headlines. Today, we have a special episode lined up, so stay tuned. The adrenaline surged through me as I waited for my turn. I could hear Mark engaging with his audience, his charismatic voice drawing them in as he discussed topics that felt painfully ironic. I wondered how many listeners had no idea of the betrayal lurking beneath the surface, how many were captivated by his charm while I prepared to unravel it all. Finally, my chance came. I heard the producer say, "We have a caller on the line. Let's see what they have to say." My heart raced as I took a deep breath and steadied my voice. "Hi, Mark, this is Alex," I said, deliberately choosing a common name that would keep my identity hidden. "Hey, Alex, thanks for calling in. What's on your mind?" Mark replied, his tone friendly and inviting. I could feel the weight of my words pressing down on me, but I forged ahead. "I wanted to talk about relationships and trust. It seems like a lot of people are struggling with infidelity these days. What do you think about that?" Mark began to respond, sharing his thoughts on the importance of communication and honesty in relationships. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it only fueled my anger. This was the man who preached about integrity while betraying his own. "Absolutely, Alex," he said. "Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, things can fall apart quickly." "Is that what happened with you, Mark?" I shot back, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within me. "Did you lose trust in your own relationship?" There was a brief pause on the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. I took a deep breath, knowing that there was no turning back now. "I mean, you've been having an affair with my wife, Sarah. You've been sleeping with a married woman while pretending to be a voice of reason for your audience." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the tension building as the reality of my words sank in. I had said it out loud, and now it was out there for everyone to hear. The audience was silent, likely in shock, and I could sense Mark's confusion turning into panic. "Wait, what?" "That's a serious accusation, Alex," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "You can't just throw something like that around without evidence." "Oh, but I have evidence," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I have screenshots of your conversations, the plans you made to meet up. You've betrayed not just me, but your entire audience who looks up to you." As I spoke, I felt a rush of empowerment. I was no longer the victim. I was taking control of the narrative. I could hear the producer scrambling in the background, trying to manage the chaos I had unleashed. "Let's take a moment to gather ourselves," Mark said, but I pressed on. "No, Mark, this is your moment to face the truth. You've built a career on trust and vulnerability, yet you've betrayed those values in the worst way possible. You're not just a podcaster, you're a fraud." The audience reaction was immediate. I could hear gasps and murmurs, the shock rippling through the airwaves. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I had taken a leap into the unknown, and it felt like I was finally reclaiming my power. "Alex, this is uncalled for," Mark said, his voice rising with urgency. "You need to calm down. No, you need to listen." I interrupted. "You need to understand the damage you've caused. You've taken my wife and you've shattered our family. You owe it to your audience to be honest about who you are." As the confrontation unfolded, I could hear Sarah's name being whispered among the audience, the realization dawning on them. I had pulled back the curtain, exposing a hidden truth that had lain dormant for far too long. "Alex, I think we should end the call," Mark said, his voice now laced with desperation. "Go ahead, but know that this isn't over. Your audience deserves to know the truth, and I won't stop until they do." With that, I hung up, my heart racing as I processed what had just happened. I had taken a stand, not just for myself, but for every person who had ever been betrayed. I had exposed Mark, and now the fallout would begin. As I sat in silence, the weight of my actions began to settle in. I had unleashed chaos, and I could only imagine the repercussions that awaited both Mark and Sarah. I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread, knowing that the truth had been unveiled, but unsure of what lay ahead. The fallout from that evening was immediate and overwhelming. I barely had time to process what had just happened before my phone began to buzz incessantly with notifications. Social media exploded with reactions to the podcast episode, and it felt as if the entire world was watching. Messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers, all sharing their shock and disbelief at the revelation. I had expected some backlash, but nothing could have prepared me for the tidal wave of responses that flooded in. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, expressing their support while others questioned my motives. Why would you air your dirty laundry like that? One message read, "This isn't the way to handle infidelity." But I had no regrets. I felt a sense of liberation, as if I had finally broken free from the chains that had bound me in silence. I had exposed the truth, and now it was out in the open for everyone to see. But along with that sense of empowerment came an undeniable weight of uncertainty. As the night wore on, I received a text from Sarah. "We need to talk," it read, but I wasn't ready to face her just yet. I could only imagine the chaos that was unfolding on her end. The backlash against Mark was swift. His audience was divided, some supporting him and others condemning him for his actions. The podcast community, which had once celebrated him as a voice of reason, was now embroiled in controversy. I turned on my television, hoping to distract myself from the reality of the situation. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting snippets from the podcast, and discussing the implications of infidelity in relationships. I watched in disbelief as they dissected Mark's career and questioned whether he could recover from such a scandal, but my thoughts were consumed by Sarah. I knew that she would be grappling with the consequences of her choices, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. She had made her bed, but I had to wonder if she ever truly understood the depth of her betrayal. The next day, I finally mustered the courage to confront her. I didn't want to prolong the inevitable any longer. When I walked into our home, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Sarah stood in the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Alex," she started, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, I never wanted it to come to this." I felt a mix of anger and sorrow as I looked at her. "You had an affair, Sarah. You chose him over me. How could you do that?" "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I got caught up in the excitement of it all. Mark listened to me, made me feel special in ways I didn't even realize I was missing. But I never wanted to hurt you." "I swear, but you did hurt me," I replied, my voice steady. "You destroyed the trust we built over years. You shattered our family, and now everyone knows." "I know, and I hate that it had to come out this way," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, let's go to counseling. Let's work on us." Her plea hung in the air, and I found myself torn. Part of me wanted to scream at her to remind her of the pain she had caused, but another part of me yearned for the connection we once shared, the love that had bound us together. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I admitted, my voice low. "How can I rebuild something that feels so broken?" "I'll prove it to you," she insisted, desperation flooding her tone. "I'll do anything. I'll cut ties with Mark, I'll go to therapy, I'll be transparent. Just give me a chance." As I listened to her, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crack. I remembered the laughter we had shared, the dreams we had built together. But the hurt was still fresh, raw, and painful. Meanwhile, Mark's world continued to unravel. News of his affair spread like wildfire, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. His social media accounts were flooded with comments from furious listeners, demanding explanations and accountability. His podcast ratings plummeted, and he was forced to address the scandal in a public statement. I watched as he attempted to salvage his image, but it felt hollow. The sincerity he had once projected was now tainted by the truth. It was a bitter victory, knowing that I had played a part in his downfall, but it also left me feeling empty. I had achieved my revenge, yet it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had hoped for. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. I had exposed Mark, but I was also faced with the reality of my own marriage. I spent time reflecting on what I truly wanted. Did I want to fight for my marriage, or was it time to walk away? Sarah and I began attending couples therapy. And while it was uncomfortable and painful, I could see her commitment to healing. She was willing to put in the work, but I was still wrestling with my own feelings. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew that rebuilding trust would take time. As I sat in the therapist's office, I realized that the journey toward healing would require honesty from both of us. I would have to confront my own feelings of betrayal and anger, while she needed to own her mistakes and work to regain my trust. The aftermath of my actions had left both Mark and Sarah reeling, but it also forced me to confront the truth about my own life and relationships. I had fought for my dignity, but now I needed to decide whether I was willing to fight for love as well. As I sat in the therapist's office, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this point. The chaos of the past few weeks had shaken my world to its core, forcing me to confront the realities of love, trust, and betrayal. I had exposed Mark, the podcaster who had so callously intruded into my marriage, but the act of revenge hadn't provided the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it had opened the door to an even more complicated emotional landscape. In therapy, Sarah and I explored the roots of her infidelity. She shared her feelings of loneliness and neglect, feelings that had festered in the shadows of our busy lives. I listened, trying to understand her perspective while still grappling with my own pain. It wasn't easy. Each session was a roller coaster of emotions, anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope that perhaps we could rebuild what had been lost. "I know I hurt you deeply," Sarah said one afternoon, her voice trembling. "But I want to be better. I want to show you that I can be the wife you deserve." Her sincerity was palpable, and I could see the determination in her eyes, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. I had trusted her implicitly, and now I found myself questioning everything. Could I ever fully trust her again? Would the memories of her betrayal always linger, casting a shadow over our attempts to reconnect? As the weeks turned into months, I started to see small signs of progress. Sarah was committed to her therapy, and I could see her making genuine efforts to communicate more openly. She began sharing her thoughts and feelings instead of bottling them up, and I found myself slowly opening up in return. It was a delicate dance of vulnerability, and while I was still haunted by the betrayal, I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I had to give her the opportunity to prove herself. Meanwhile, Mark's downfall continued to unfold. His podcast was effectively canceled, and he faced a barrage of criticism from fans who felt betrayed by his actions. I had followed the developments with a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. He had built a career on trust, and now that foundation lay in ruins. I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. He had been exposed for the fraud he was. But at the same time, I recognized that his downfall was a human tragedy. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often thought about the nature of trust in relationships. It was fragile, easily shattered by betrayal, but also resilient when nurtured with honesty and vulnerability. I realized that rebuilding trust would require both Sarah and me to be transparent about our feelings, to confront the discomfort head-on rather than avoiding it. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I turned to Sarah and said, "I want to try. I want to work on us, but it's going to take time. I need you to understand that I'm still hurt." "I understand," she replied, her eyes earnest. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." Her words resonated with me, and for the first time since the revelation of her affair, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps we could find our way back to each other. Perhaps love could bloom again in the ashes of betrayal. As I navigated the complexities of rebuilding our relationship, I also found solace in the knowledge that I had confronted my own pain. I had taken a stand, not just for myself, but for the integrity of our marriage. The act of exposing Mark had been a catalyst for change, forcing both Sarah and me to confront the uncomfortable truths about our lives. In the end, I realized that healing was not a linear path. It was messy, filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. There would be days when I felt overwhelmed by the memories of betrayal, and other days when I felt the warmth of love and connection returning. As I looked toward the future, I understood that trust would take time to rebuild, but I was willing to invest in that journey. I had fought for my dignity, and now I was ready to fight for love. Together, Sarah and I would navigate the complexities of our relationship, embracing the lessons learned from our shared pain. With each passing day, I felt the weight of betrayal lifting, replaced by a renewed sense of commitment. We had both made mistakes, but it was in the willingness to confront those mistakes that we could forge a new path. Trust would be rebuilt, step by step, as long as we continued to communicate openly and honestly. As I sat with Sarah, reflecting on our journey, I realized that love was not just about the good times. It was also about weathering the storms together. I had faced the darkness of betrayal and emerged with a deeper understanding of myself and what it meant to love someone fully. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to embrace it, hand in hand with the woman I had once thought I would lose forever. Together, we would write a new chapter, one built on honesty, vulnerability, and a commitment to rebuilding what had been lost. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We were on a long road, but at least we were on it together. And for now, that was enough.